Hi, my name is Rob Sweeney. I'm the author of You're Not Just a Diagnosis Using Trauma Informed Techniques to Create Your Best Life. And I'm talking today with Ali Ahmed and Brandon McGowen about a film they recently completed, a short film called Buried and Forgotten, which was written, produced, directed, and stars Ali. Right. Ali, how did you get into this in the first place? Did you go to film school or?
I did study film history in college, but I just have always been like a film fan. I've always wanted to be an actor and didn't really pursue this till later, a bit till after school. But I went to acting school after undergrad and went to the neighborhood playhouse in New York. So my training is in acting. So I'm self-taught as a writer, filmmaker. The story is a neo noir film about an alcoholic who's come home after a very long time. You know, it's been more than a year, and he's trying to stay sober because he comes from a devout Muslim family. His uncle's in his final days of cancer, and as he's trying to stay sober, there's this sort of dark revelation that occurs, and then it's the story is about seeing how he's going to react with that and deal with that. That's the trailer playing right now. And aside from addiction and mental health, there's something else we touch on is sexual abuse. So there's a lot of heavy subject matter.
It's been so long.
You need to stay sober.
Well, I want to.
Do you want me to see you?
They've been treating me like I murdered or raped someone.
Stop feeling sorry for yourself.
I felt like an outcast my whole life, and now I feel like a criminal.
What you say they treat you like has happened to me. I need me to acknowledge this.
Why wouldn't she believe you?
I don't know. That's not all that happened.
You get belligerently fucked up and hurt other people and you don't even care.
You can't avoid this. I can't take it anymore.
Sarah, bus!
Society is sick. So why do we blame ourselves?
What was the key message that you were really trying to get across in this particular film?
It was, this was a character exploration journey. So it was it was almost slice of life in a sense, which is what like the challenges were, in terms of putting in so much of a story in 20 minutes, like you said. But it was really about trying to convey what, this guy's psyche and him being in this very dark place and not having the support system and dealing with the combination of a lot of self-hatred and this thing of feeling very ostracized and just seeing how far someone can go in that pursuit of finding some redemption. That was definitely a big aspect of this character's journey.
hmm Now, one of the things that you can pick up from the clip that we just saw was how the relationship between the brother and sister are kind of key to the way the whole family works. And the sister in this family is probably the strongest character, but not the one who goes through the longest arc or the most change in the course of the story. When you were writing this story and you were thinking about her, did you have like a model in mind or a family structure that you had in mind? What were you thinking of when you were writing that into the story?
Yeah, I definitely wanted them to be have a sort of polar opposite way of dealing with trauma. That was sort of the essence of it. And them, representing the flip side of that of the coin was it was an important thing in terms of like just the big picture aspect of their relationship and their dynamic.
hmm
Um, but definitely for her, I think what made her interesting to me was coming at it from a point of view of resiliency. So she's not someone who's consumed in her self pity or, she's been through a lot, but she's had time to process it on her own. And I think the aspect of her where she's not holding grudges, and she's not wallowing in self-destruction. She just represents a very different template for how someone has experienced trauma in life and how she's dealing with it. And so her struggle in the story is more about um, essentially truth and the lack of in this family, and confronting the mother about something important as well, which is what it culminates into with for her.
Hmm.
Um, and then so my character is dealing with everything in a very different way. So he is wallowing in self pity and resentment, um, and doesn't have the same tools that she has in himself to to deal with all of that.
Hmm. Now, in this particular family, there are some traumas that everybody shares, and then everybody has their own individual trauma and sort of their own way of dealing with trauma, or you could see the symptoms related to that traumatic experience, and they're kind of specific to what that character's gone through. Did you do some kind of studying, or just human nature? Where did you come up with those particular reactions to trauma?
I feel like it was happening over time. I wasn't consciously thinking about it. And that I was writing different stories. I had written a short that was just about alcoholism very specifically. I thought, hey, this is something I want to explore. So it was kind of a culmination of a lot of different ideas, and over time thinking about a lot of different things. Um, and so, like for instance, a film that I saw that I loved that was in my head amongst many was like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Um, so uh, that's like an example of something that I looked at. But yeah, I think in terms of like what I was drawing from creatively, it was definitely pulling from everything. People I know, things I've seen, just kind of the whole gamut of it all.
Okay. Brendan, working on this set with a really emotional story like this, was it difficult for you guys, for the crew, to kind of maintain? Because everybody's gone through something, and every once in a while you can be triggered by the work that you do when it's got nothing to do with the work that you're doing at the moment. You know what I mean?
Yes, we had a really good crew on this. Everybody, I think, recognized the gravity of the subject matter. And there were a few times where we really took a moment to kind of check in. There are some um, especially graphic or just sort of heavy and intense sequences. And it's easy, I think, to get caught up in like making the thing to actually, you can get so caught up in it that you forget that what actors, I mean, Ali was really in it. Um, and you can sense the energy in the room, and sometimes it's easy to just get lost in like what you're doing and what you're supposed to be doing, regardless of what your position is. And I think this crew, especially, um, being relatively small and being all very present and just getting along very well, I think we were all pretty tapped into what was happening. And it wasn't like we were looking for levity or anything within creating it or anything. I think we just had, um, we understood the assignment. We understood the necessity of being efficient while also acknowledging um, how, I mean, traumatic all the events that we were uh, documenting are.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I felt lucky because this was the first collaboration for everyone. All the crew and all the cast members. This was the first time we were all working together, and the attitude everyone had and the energy everyone brought was really good. And I feel like we immediately gelled together. From the first day, from the first scenes we started shooting, and yeah, and it's like by the end of it, it's like you've become this tight knit group. Because you have to work as a unit, and but the sense of support was there. Which was really nice and great. And like Brennan said, the kind of intimacy, and the presence that everyone had was there.
That's great. Now, the two main actors, other than yourself, are the young lady who played your sister and your mother. Who were they?
Yes. So the lead actress, her name's Anya Banerjee. She we had connected. Someone had referred me to her. Say, hey, there's another actress you should know, and we connected. And then I sent her the script, and she read for me. She did send an audition, and it was terrific. Like it was a real standout tape, and she's a really great actress. And she
Hmm.
flew out from Los Angeles for the weekend to work with us on this project. and then Inji I connected with as well, and she also did a phenomenal job. Um, yeah, so yeah, they're like actresses that did really great work, and like we've been saying, like there are a lot of intense scenes, but they really just deliver on them.
Yeah,
Especially
it was a it
theirs
was a
culminating
terrific
scenes at the
production.
end.
Yeah,
Thanks.
it was a terrific production, which brings up the question, Ali, this was you're the director, you're also the star. How did you have to work with your crew to sort of get the shot you wanted and the performance from yourself that you were looking for when you're not on the other side of the camera watching what you do?
Trust was the big thing. I wanted the set to feel like a safe space. So I
Mhm.
talked a lot about that with the actors on the actor side of it in terms of how I was directing the actors. We did rehearsals, and had about 2 weeks to rehearse with my actors. And then with the crew, everyone was just very like, very focused, diligent. I mean, it was, we're covering a lot of pages every single day. And so if I'm in a shot and, Brendan says this looks good, I had that trust in him to trust his opinion. And when I wasn't in the scene, then I was able to watch what was going on. So, it's part of it is like the prepare as much as you can, and you never feel like you can always feel like you could prepare more, so that when you're there you're just trying to be present. And then the other aspect of it was like trying to not micromanage, which I think kind of goes hand in hand with that too, because you get your confidence from your prep. Um and yeah, and it was just my first time directing, and also wearing so many hats. I was just listening to a lot of directors, like watching interviews. I spoke to some directors as well who are starting out, who have done tons of shorts and are doing like their first or two features. Um, and yeah, just kind of got that advice. It's just like, I guess you have to, if everyone working with you really knows the story, and then you can try, and what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to express, then you can just trust them to do their jobs. And you just have to make sure you're communicating what we're going for, and know that they'll deliver on their front with that.
Mhm. Okay. Now, normally, one of the complaints you get about films currently is that people kind of hit you over the head with the message, right? There's the message, and they kind of bang you with that over and over. And I thought you were a lot more subtle in that, in the way you presented it in this story. Um, how did Was there something that you specifically wanted to target to make that possible, or how did that come across when you were creating this story?
That I mean, that's important to me as a writer, to never be
Hmm.
didactic. I think like even just like the film references we had, and just my own kind of personal philosophy on storytelling and writing. I'm very big on not wanting to be didactic. Um, and so like a writer that I love is David Mamet, and he has this book, and he talks about that it's about the journey that you're taking them on, and it's about catharsis ultimately. So
Hmm.
this character does have a catharsis, except that he's an anti-hero, and so his catharsis is not one that the audience would necessarily agree with. But from his subjective point of view, it was about getting to that place of catharsis, and the challenge was in setting up where he was coming from in such a short time span.
Hmm.
Mentally, that is, yeah, and
Sure.
emotionally, yeah.
Okay. Now, both of you have mentioned a lot of international influences, and this movie specifically has it's a South Asian family. What is the origin of the family in the characters in the movie, rather than me
Uh,
trying to guess?
oh yeah, so they're Pakistani background.
Okay. But you don't hit people over the head with that. It's not like you see a lot of movies where you get an ethnic family and they keep talking about the old country and back home, this is what we used to do. And it's a lot more subtle than that. Was that purposeful, or was that part of the message? Why did it come across the way it did?
I think it, like culture, and it was obviously set in, that family, and so you see, what the dynamics are of family members from that background. But
Hmm.
that aspect of them is just a layer of the story and who they are, and the story isn't about culture or identity crisis, or I think any of the topics that you see a lot of when it comes to specifically to Brown stories that are
Mhm.
coming up, and which are great when they're done well. But this was it was it's a specific story in terms of what we're about, and it's set in that context, and it's a niche context for people to see a story like this. Just because I think a story like this hasn't been made often, and that's also why we felt very excited to tell it. But still, the things we hit on are very universal. Addiction, codependency in relationships, family trauma. We're hitting on very universal things here that I think everyone will relate to and identify within some level, I think. Um, so definitely, I think the authenticity of capturing that was something that as actors we got to do and bring, but which was great, which was fun. I'd never shot something like this before. But in terms of the story, it was not what the story's about fundamentally.
I know when I watched it, I felt like I could identify very much with what the family and the characters were going through. So the ethnic background wasn't a barrier to me being a part of what was going on in that family at that time, because I think what you were expressing was a lot more universal than that. When we talk about family structures and how in a traumatic experience the whole family has to shift to kind of make up for the difference in that, the one family trauma that wasn't on camera was dad's death, and how once the father has died, everybody sort of shifts to make up this change because of what happens next. Um, when you think about that, was that something that you were trying to think about when you were writing, or was that something that kind of came about as part of the process? Because he's sort of a character off screen that we know he's like the invisible 800-pound gorilla in the room. Is that kind of the way you thought about it, or is that just kind of something that I picked up when I watched?
It was definitely written that way. Yeah. Uh, he, it's a big part of the backstory of, and without giving too much away, which I guess is the tough part here, but his death is really influenced, like you said, the way they all changed and shifted. And so, yeah, it was something that was woven into the writing and it's referenced a lot. So there's moments where it comes back, but for me, the way I kind of materialized that into the movie was using a watch. That was like a key prop. It's like the final shot of the movie as well. It's dad's
Right.
watch. So um that's like I guess sort of a device we had in terms
There
yeah.
it is. That's
This is
Randy
the
Uh,
was
watch
still
from the
has the
film.
watch.
yeah. So yeah, and so we kept coming back to that. That was the thing that it also is the thing that kind of brings the two sibling characters closer. The sister's trying to give him the watch. She's looking for the watch. So it's lurking. Yeah, his presence. That's something that's constantly lurking in the background. It's something that is with the characters all the time, even though he's not there.
Sure. When you're talking in family therapy, you'll describe something like that as sort of a totem, and there'll be this totem object that has its own sort of power. And I know you guys sort of expressed that in the film by the way you filmed that, the way that it showed up on camera. Like you said in that last scene, it was here's on the screen, it's a giant watch where it was this small watch earlier on. It becomes bigger through the process of the film. Was that on purpose, Brendan, or was that something that just kind of happened?
Totally, totally on purpose.
Yeah, I thought so. I could tell by the expression on your face. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted the watch to feel really kind of heavy. I wanted it to have the emotional weight that it has for the characters in the film.
Uh-huh.
And there's something. I mean, the metaphor of a watch is, eternal and can go 1,000 different ways. But there's something about within the context of this film that made the watch feel like, especially because it's been passed from a figure who, this sort of heroic figure, the father, to this really seedy and awful figure we find. Uh, you know, Abdul's kind of like rescuing it. I don't know. I wanted the watch needed to feel coveted, and the way Abdul comes into the room in the final scene, like kind of carrying the watch as if it's a decapitated head or something. That's um, it's like it's a trophy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It has that power in and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many of the characters have their own weight and emotion that they prescribe to it. The sister has meaning for her in a different way than it does to Abdul by the end. But we know that they all through that, we see the significance that that object has to them.
Yeah. And the other thing that sort of changes through the movie that sort of parallels that is a shift in power dynamic between the mom, the sister, the brother, and his alcoholism. It's sort of like the alcoholism is almost another character in the movie, and you can see its pull over Ahmed changing as the movie goes on. Again, you started by writing a story about alcoholism. Was that kind of what you had in mind, or was there a point that you wanted to make about alcoholism when you started writing?
Um, as I got deeper into writing, the script just kept evolving, and I think I became more interested in the mind of someone going through that experience than the
Mhm.
thing itself. Because we've seen alcoholism on screen plenty of times. So another like film reference another movie that I love is The Lost Weekend. It's a really great film, also in that noir genre. But yeah, it evolved, and so I got more into like the mind of someone that's in that very deep dark place, and then creatively just my imagination kind of kept taking me in different places and just kind of deepening the story that I was developing. But yeah, there's definitely, like you said, power shift. You see in terms of, like, for instance, with the mom character, the way that she interacts with her children and depicted in a way it would occur in a South Asian family, versus by the end when truth comes out and which is why I love those like Dutch shots at the end, especially on her. There's one that's very jarring too, towards the very end of the film.
Mhm.
So yeah, the rug's been pulled under everyone's feet in the film, and there's a point around halfway through the movie when that occurs. And so as we're building up to that point, um, and you think you're seeing a certain film, and then that happens, and then you realize the amount of weight that's actually there that then kind of carries it forth to the end.
Now, again, to talk about the story of the film, this is a young man coming home because his mother insists he come home because uncle is dying of cancer, right?
Hmm.
And there he runs into his sister, his mother, and his uncle living in the house together. And it sort of illustrates all these power dynamics and the relationships between all of them. It starts out very familiar. Mom saying things like, "You've lost weight and you need to eat more," things like that. And then evolves into this whole different story as it goes along. I don't want to give too much of the story away, but as the characters go through the film, everybody has their own special trauma that is in addition to the big family trauma of uncles dying of cancer. And the way each of them deals with that is a big part of why the story evolves the way it does. So that's one of those stories. It's a 20-minute film that seems to tell a 2-hour message. How did you pare everything down to 20 minutes? Like, you both had to work really hard to make this short film a full film.
Yeah, it was only written as a 20-page script actually, but the first cut we had of the movie was like 30 minutes. So, which not surprisingly, and then it took a while to kind of cut it down and keep bringing it down, to now just a bit under 20. Um, it just I started out as a feature film screenwriter, so in my brain, the way I'd been telling stories was just in a much longer format with slower pacing. It was more about building the character arc and the relationships and seeing the evolution of those things. So this being my first short as a filmmaker, it was a transition to this medium, and so I wasn't really super uptight about wanting to tell a story in like under X minutes, like under 7 minutes or whatever. I just had this idea and kind of just felt like I told it to what felt like completion, which might not even be what a lot of short films are, because they're more like a window into a film, into a story. And this was like a fully developed kind of narrative. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely on the longer side for a short, but we made it happen.
It's terrific. Now, Ali, when we talk about trauma specifically, one of the things that people point out is they feel sort of stuck in the moment, like they can't escape that traumatic experience, and they can't move on. And the person who kind of demonstrated that aloud the most was the sister, but mom was as much stuck in her traumatic experience as well. Was that something that it's something I could point out when I show the film to people? But is that something that you kind of had a point that you wanted to make clear, or was it just something that made the plot more palatable, more useful?
I think for me, the mom was someone who, couldn't digest the truth, and so
Okay.
I think sometimes people would rather kind of, brush things aside or try to change what, the reality of something is with their beliefs or however it might be. With Abdul, it was substance abuse, um, and she just couldn't. There's a lot of truth that was tough to bear that she couldn't process. I think with Sarah, it's that she was able to process what she'd been through, and she wasn't lying to herself, or to anyone else. And that's part of like kind of where what she realizes and early on, and what really distinguishes her from the other characters, even in the first half of the film. And Abdul is different in that he just goes all the way to the deep dark end of, um, just not being able to see clearly, you know of not finding self-awareness, I
Hmm.
guess one way of putting it.
Yeah, if you're going to put it that way, you can see clearly that Ali is very much externally driven,
Abdul,
and
you mean?
Sarah is very internally driven, and you can see what those external drivers are as the film progresses, because he kind of depends on things externally before he makes a decision, before he makes a move, before he gets any energy. It's all outside of himself. And I think a lot of people can have a lot of sympathy with that feeling because they kind of depend on other folks to sort of move them along, move them forward. And that seems to be one of the roles within the family that a lot of families would be familiar with. So that's one of the things I really liked about the way the film was put together was I could recognize these different roles from pretty much any family I've seen in the past. So it was great that way. Now, psychology, we spend a lot of time talking about why people do what they do. And the classic joke in acting is I have to know why this character is doing something before I can do it. What's my character's motivation? And one of the things that we talk about in psychology is we know what your motivation is. We know why you do what you do. Everybody has the same basic needs. Everybody needs love and belonging, power and control. We all need the same things. The difference is why you make the silly choices you make. And as a psychologist, what I'm trying to do is convince you to make better choices. In acting, you keep hearing over and over, I need to know the motivation. And the director's saying, I need you to make choices and just do something because the camera's rolling and you're wasting time. That's the classic line you hear from movies about acting. How does that kind of, when you think about motivation for your characters and for the story specifically, you've got a guy coming home with alcoholism who has to deal with this trauma and really doesn't know how to manage without help. What kind of motivators Ollie, were you thinking that you needed to come out of your characters to show on film, like we needed to know about?
I don't think about motivation. I really don't like people
Classic.
that are
I asked a terrible
intellectual
question.
about
That's
it.
classic. Okay.
No, it's good. It's good because it's like you said, something people say often, or the
Yeah.
way I guess people try to understand how actors work. And I don't think there's any like one or right or wrong way. Like I'm sure everyone has their own way of working. I don't really feel like I have like a quote unquote process, but for me, what was important was like I wanted everyone to not be afraid to like take risks and not be afraid to fail, which is why rehearsals are so important. Especially for something that does have more of that cinema verite feel to it. You just want people to really be there. You don't want to see anyone trying to act. And to get in that place of like being, which I know sounds very like whatever, like I'm trying to sound snobby or something, but I think that yeah, it's like you gotta know what you're doing, you gotta understand the story, and because I wrote it, I did, um, and I just wanted everyone else to, just feel very connected to what they were doing, and uh, and we did a lot of playing around in rehearsals and trying it different ways, and not get stuck in like a right or wrong way of doing it, but just kind of finding what feels like it's coming from what feels most alive, because I think that that's what you want. You want to see someone just being very present, really listening. Like, I think it's just working by like those principles, which is like how I was taught acting. And I think that no matter what your approach is, like, good acting is good acting, no matter how you get there. So just get there.
Okay. And Brandon, you're shaking your head. You kind of agree with that?
I do agree with that. Yeah. I think I mean, everyone's process is different and ultimately irrelevant. Especially with acting, the process is primarily internal. You work from the inside out. For some people, other people work from the outside in, but I think, yeah, the process is irrelevant. I think it's more about spatial awareness and respect for the space and the other people that you're with, and yeah.
And I was lucky because I had actors who were very passionate about wanting to tell the story. So,
Mhm.
you want to work with actors that can can act well and have like, like good, well-tuned instruments. But then you also want to work with people that can then be in service of that story through their acting. So you kind of have to, I think with good acting, it's when both of those things meet.
It's an excellent story to tell, and I can see why they would be committed to it. I really enjoyed the writing that you put into the story. It meant a lot to me to understand what you were trying to say when you came across in the movie.
Mm. Um, it's an indie film, but I think there's just hopefully I feel like we put like a lot of soul into it. And it's it's about family and people, and it's just we just wanted to tell a story that deals with you know um I guess nuanced things, but with like a lot of humanity. So that's like what I'm very proud of. And that was sort of like what I was hoping to kind of pull off when I was writing this, and which is why I'm like really proud of like just how it all came together and the work everyone did. Um, but yeah, it's I don't really see it as I see it less as like a lesson or a message, and just more as like just something wanting that I wanted to express through what the character's journey was. And sure, people can have like their own interpretations of why they think someone did this or that, But I think it's also been kind of cool to hear that. It's cool to hear other people's opinions and thoughts on uh, the people in the story afterwards, and hopefully, once we put this out, we get to have like those kinds of conversations and even broader conversations about the really important things that the film touches on in terms of issues like, say, in society or mental health.
There's some real surprising twists in the story too. It's a serious film in that it's about serious topics, but it's a fun film to watch because you don't expect to happen what happens, and it's a fun plot on top of serious topics and well acted production. So it's well worth watching just because it's a fun movie to watch.
I think I like the idea of the film addressing a myriad of there are so many different elements that I think are relevant conversations within it, including mental health and the way that family members and within family units treat people with mental health. Um, Believing people who come forward with um, uh, assaults and believing women and things like that, and the way we treat addicts and people who um, deal with substance abuse. I think it's a really human story, and the um, and it feels dark when you're in there, but afterwards, I think it feels kind of hopeful. So I'm happy
There's
with
some
that.
very dark moments, especially with the uncle. Um, he's not the kind of character that you want to spend a lot of time with, I would think.
Oh yeah, great performance by him. Yeah, really excellent.
Mm.
But the
But
the film noir was sort of an inspiration for this, and
Oh,
one
the
thing that I
voices.
recognized was the uncle, but the other one was
Right.
the dialogue, the inner dialogue.
Yeah.
Was that part of what you were shooting for? Was that film noir feeling, or was that something particularly because it's a short film and you've got a lot to cover in short film? Was that a tool you used just for that, or because of the inspiration?
Not actually, not even. I was just kind of playing around with that.
Okay.
So yeah, that was something I was just playing with. In terms of adding another layer to my character Abdul, who's a very internal character, and that was part of the challenge of playing him. It's very tough playing someone internal because you have to be totally present as the person, the actor doing the performance, but not try to be internal, but still kind of convey what's going on. And there's moments where I'm not talking much, or just saying very very few words in certain scenes, and others I'm a bit more expressive. So I just thought it'd be interesting to kind of play with that and show a little of a different side of him.
It also shows how the sister misinterprets what he's thinking, and you can see why and how she would misinterpret that, because that inner dialogue says something completely different than what she seems to believe he's thinking. And
Yeah.
it drives the story in a different direction than what you would expect if it hadn't been there.
Yeah, and that's another thing with this being a short and not a feature in terms of how much context you have. And the kind of fun thing to play with was that you don't ever fully know what someone's thinking either. So it was kind of just playing with that, especially with someone who's, when you're dealing with characters where one of the kind of aspects of the story is like truth versus deception, and authenticity or self-awareness versus like lying to yourself. And so there's that element of it is there. And so that was just another kind of fun thing to play with in their, in their dynamic. And, when he's listening, she thinks he's listening, and then he's actually, his thoughts are off somewhere else, and he doesn't really have control of his thoughts. He's very overwhelmed by his thoughts.
It's one of the fun parts of the character to watch, and it's also one of the things that you can point to in that psychology class that I was imagining showing the film too. You could point to the way people process information differently than you expect by looking at their face. You can't get everything from an expression. There's more to what they're going through than just what they show in their eyes, and that it's important to pay attention to everything about what's going on with them, and to teach them to pay attention to themselves as well. That's a lot of people will have that internal dialogue and not listen to what they're saying to themselves rationally, the way you would objectively if someone else said that to you. And so a lot of psychology, spending time talking to people about their inner dialogue, and what scripts they keep repeating to themselves, and what that means both to them and to the people around them. That's the effect it has on others, can be pretty devastating sometimes. And if you don't pay attention, it just gets worse. So that's one of the reasons why I thought your film in particular would be really a good tool for teaching some basic concepts in psychology and counseling. So I'm really excited to be able to use that when you guys are done with the film festival season, when it's
Thanks.
available for that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Cool.
thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
That's definitely something I wanted to convey, and it hits an important point in terms of mental health and our culture and awareness of it. So yeah,
what's your specialty?
is that my specialty, making like
Is that your
psychological
specialty,
films?
psych movies?
I wouldn't say so. This was first attempt at doing something like this. I in terms of like the writing I've done, I think I've a lot of the themes or topics I've hit on have been family dramas, but also like hitting on like immigration. Like I wrote this Syrian refugee script that was a coming of age film set at a camp. So I've definitely explored trauma before and family dynamics before. Um, but yeah, I think that the psychological aspect of it was very fun and kind of what made this a bit more different too.
Sure. I want to say congratulations. The film is really, really good. I was really impressed by the whole thing, and the fact that you finished an entire story the way you did in the 20 minutes was really impressive. And I really, of all the strengths the movie has, what impressed me the most was the writing. But pretty much anything that I could point to, I could say you really did that well. So this was a real project you guys could be proud of, and I hope it gets a lot of attention in the future because of that.
Thank you.
So
I appreciate that.
Ali Ahmed, Brendan McGowen, this has been a real pleasure talking with you both. The film was Buried and Forgotten, which is not about the uncle who has cancer necessarily, but the main character Ali is coming home to visit his family, and we
Abdul?
see the drama. I did that again. It's Abdul, right? Main
Yeah.
character Abdul. I apologize, man.
It's all good.
Coming home to visit family, and it's a 20-minute film that's being released to film festivals and will be out to the regular public after that. Gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for doing this. It's been
Yeah.
great. Yeah.